I am Sherry Thompson, 32 years old, and I never thought my finance career would create such a deep rift in my family. Last month, I drove to my childhood home for our traditional Sunday dinner, excited to see my parents after being away for months building my investment portfolio. The moment I walked through that familiar front door though, I sensed something was off in their tight smiles and nervous glances. If you enjoy stories about family drama and financial independence, let me know where you are watching from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to join me on this journey of setting boundaries that changed everything. Growing up in a modest two-story house in Boston's Dorchester neighborhood, money was always a carefully managed resource in our household. My parents, Frank and Diana Thompson, were the definition of middle-class America, living paycheck to paycheck but determined to provide stability for their children. Dad worked as a high school science teacher while Mom balanced part-time accounting work with raising us. Their financial philosophy was simple: work hard, save what you can, and never spend what you don't have. From an early age, they instilled these traditional values in me. I remember sitting at our oak kitchen table at age 7 as Mom explained how to divide my $5 weekly allowance into 3 glass jars labeled spend, save, and share. This system taught me the fundamentals of budgeting before I even understood what a budget was. Money doesn't grow on trees. Sherry, Dad would remind me whenever I asked for something beyond our means. Everything costs someone's time and effort. This phrase became so familiar that my brother James and I would mouth the words behind his back, rolling our eyes dramatically while suppressing giggles. Our home was modest but comfortable. The faded blue wallpaper in the hallway, the creaky third step on the staircase, and the small backyard where we played catch during summer evenings all represented the secure but frugal life my parents built. In our neighborhood, most families lived similarly, working-class people who valued stability over luxury. Every purchase in our household was carefully considered. I recall the family meeting called to discuss buying a new refrigerator when I was teen. Dad brought home Consumer Reports magazines, and we spent an entire evening reviewing options, calculating costs, and discussing the merits of each model. This wasn't just about an appliance. It was a lesson in consumer research and thoughtful spending. My first experience with saving for something significant came when I was 11 and desperately wanted a red Schwinn bicycle I had spotted at the local store. The price tag of $120 might as well have been $1 million to me at that age. Instead of simply saying no, my parents created a matching program. For every dollar I saved, they would add 50 cents. It took me nearly 8 months of lawn mowing, dog walking, and foregoing small treats, but the day we went to purchase that bike remains one of my proudest childhood memories. James, 4 years younger than me, approached money differently from the start. While I meticulously saved, he spent his allowance almost immediately on trading cards or candy. This fundamental difference in our relationship with money would eventually grow into a chasm between us. Holidays and special occasions in our family were never extravagant but always meaningful. Christmas presents had strict budget limits, but Mom made up for it with homemade treats and thoughtfully chosen gifts. Birthday celebrations featured homemade cakes rather than store-bought ones, and instead of expensive outings, we enjoyed free community events and picnics at the local park. Throughout high school, I maintained part-time jobs at the local library and later as a barista at a coffee shop. My parents beamed with pride when I showed them my savings account balance, nodding approvingly as it grew steadily. They had clear expectations for my future: graduate high school, with good grades, attend a solid state university on scholarship if possible, and pursue a career with benefits and a pension, something stable like teaching or nursing. Security is what matters in the long run, Mom would say, while balancing the checkbook at the dining table, glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Look at your father and me. We may not be rich, but we sleep well at night knowing our bills are paid. I admired their work ethic and responsibility, but even then something in me questioned whether their path was the only right one. I loved math and had a fascination with the stock market that began when our economics teacher had us participate in a virtual stock market competition. While most students chose companies they recognized like Nike or McDonald's, I researched emerging tech firms and ended up winning the class competition by a significant margin. When I shared my excitement about investments and markets with my parents, they listened politely but with visible concern. The stock market is basically gambling for people in suits, Dad warned. For every winner there are a dozen losers who lost their life savings. Despite their skepticism, they supported my academic interests as long as they led toward what they considered a sensible career. Little did any of us know then how our different perspectives on money would eventually collide in ways none of us could have anticipated. When the acceptance letter from Boston University arrived in our mailbox, my parents organized a small celebration dinner. Though not an Ivy League school, BU represented a significant achievement and the fulfillment of their hopes for my education. What they didn't tell me then, but I later discovered, was how they had taken out a second mortgage on our home to help cover the tuition costs that my scholarships didn't meet. "We believe in investing in your future," Mom said as we moved my belongings into the freshman dormitory. Dad nodded in agreement, his eyes reflecting both pride and worry. "Just make it count, chérie. Study something practical that will lead to a good job." I initially declared as an education major to please them, following in Dad's footsteps, but everything changed during my sophomore year when I took an introductory economics class with Professor Hamilton. A former Wall Street analyst with a passion for teaching, he recognized something in me during class discussions that I hadn't fully acknowledged in myself. "You have a natural intuition for market dynamics," he told me after I'd correctly predicted 3 consecutive market trends in our simulation exercises. "That's not something that can be taught. It's pattern recognition and risk assessment at an instinctual level." Under his guidance, I switched my major to economics with a concentration in financial markets, a decision that led to my first serious argument with my parents during Thanksgiving break. "Economics?" Dad questioned, his fork paused midair during dinner. "What kind of job does that lead to, teaching economics?" "Not exactly," I explained, trying to contain my excitement. "I'm thinking about investment banking or fund management. Professor Hamilton thinks I have a real talent for it." Mom exchanged a worried glance with Dad. "That sounds very competitive, sweetie. And isn't that industry full of, well, cutthroat types?" What I couldn't properly express to them was how the world of finance had captivated me. While other students complained about complex financial models and market theory, I absorbed it all like a sponge, often reading far beyond the required materials. The elegant mathematics behind option pricing, the psychology of market movements, the global interconnections of capital flows, it all clicked in my brain in a way nothing else ever had. During my junior year, I took my first real risk with money. Using the $2,000 I had saved from my campus job at the library, I invested in shares of a small biotech company that was flying under the radar but had just received promising preliminary results for a new treatment. Professor Hamilton had taught us to look for overlooked opportunities and to do research beyond headline news. 3 months later, when the company announced successful trial results, my investment tripled. I called my parents, barely able to contain my excitement. "I turned $2,000 into $6,000, I practically shouted into the phone. The silence on the other end was telling. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice tight. "Chérie, that was incredibly risky. You could have lost everything. Is this what college is teaching you, how to gamble?" No amount of explaining about research-calculated risks or diversification strategies could convince them. In their minds, the stock market was for people who could afford to lose money, not for middle-class families like ours. Their fear was understandable. They had lived through market crashes and seen colleagues lose retirement savings. But their caution felt stifling to me. By senior year, the divide between my financial philosophy and theirs had grown wider. I secured a prestigious internship at Goldman Sachs for the summer before graduation, an opportunity that came with a decent stipend and potential for future employment. "It's in New York," I told them during winter break, watching their expressions carefully. "They only accept about 3% of applicants." "New York is so expensive," Mom immediately replied. "And so far away? Couldn't you find something closer to home?" "This is Goldman Sachs." I emphasized, hoping they would understand the significance. It could set me up for my entire career. The conversation devolved into another heated discussion about sensible career paths versus risky ones. Dad pointed out teachers' pension benefits while I tried to explain potential earning trajectories in finance. We reached an impasse that night, both sides frustrated and misunderstood. When graduation finally arrived in May, my parents sat proudly in the audience as I received my degree cum laude. In the photos from that day, we all wear genuine smiles, temporarily setting aside our differences to celebrate the achievement. What none of us fully realized was that this milestone marked not just my academic completion, but the beginning of a fundamental shift in our family's power dynamics. "We're so proud of you," Mom said, hugging me tightly after the ceremony. "Whatever you choose to do, we love you." In that moment, their support felt unconditional. But as I packed my belongings for the move to New York, and my entry-level position at the investment firm that had offered me a job following my internship, I sensed that we were entering uncharted territory in our relationship, one where their financial wisdom and life experience might no longer serve as my primary guides. My first apartment in New York was a far cry from the comfortable home I'd grown up in. Located in Astoria, Queens, the tiny one-bedroom unit with questionable plumbing and noisy neighbors was all I could afford on my entry-level salary. The contrast between my daily work environment, the gleaming glass towers of Midtown Manhattan, and my cramped living space was jarring but motivating. Those first months tested my resolve. The financial sector's notorious 80-hour work weeks left little time for sleep, let alone a social life. I was at the bottom of the corporate ladder performing data analysis, preparing presentation materials, and handling administrative tasks for senior managers who barely knew my name. 3 months in, when my security deposit for the apartment and initial moving expenses had depleted my savings more than expected, I swallowed my pride and called home. "Mom, I hate to ask, but could I borrow $2,000 until my next paycheck?" The cost of getting set up here was more than I anticipated. The silence on the other end spoke volumes before she finally answered. "We'll need to check our emergency fund, chérie. Things are a bit tight with the property taxes due next month." They sent the money, but the accompanying email contained a detailed repayment plan and gentle suggestions about budgeting, plus links to articles about young professionals living beyond their means. Their help came with unspoken but palpable disappointment that their financially savvy daughter needed a bailout. I repaid them within 60 days, working overtime and cutting every possible expense. This pattern repeated itself occasionally during my first year, Davina's temporary shortfalls followed by reluctant requests for help, each time with increasing tension on both sides. Meanwhile, I poured myself into learning everything I could about market analysis. While my colleagues hit happy hours after work, I stayed late studying client portfolios and market trends. On weekends, instead of exploring New York, I attended free investment seminars and devoured books on financial strategy. My breakthrough came unexpectedly during my second year. While analyzing data for a client presentation, I noticed a pattern in a mid-sized technology company that had recently undergone leadership changes. The market had reacted negatively to the CEO's departure, but my research indicated the new leadership team had stronger technical backgrounds and a more viable product roadmap. I drafted an analysis and tentatively presented it to my supervisor, suggesting the firm should consider recommending this stock to certain clients. "Interesting work, Thompson," he said, skimming my report. "But we'll stick with the consensus view for now. Too risky to go against market sentiment on this one." Disappointed but undeterred, I decided to invest $3,000 of my own money in the company. It represented nearly all of my meager savings, but my conviction was strong. 4 months later, when the company announced better-than-expected earnings and a major new client contract, the stock rose 60%. This personal success gave me confidence to become more vocal in team meetings. I began offering analysis and suggestions that sometimes challenged the firm's conventional wisdom. Most were dismissed, but occasionally, a senior manager would pause, consider my perspective, and incorporate elements of my ideas. By my third year, these small victories had accumulated into a growing reputation. I was assigned to more significant projects and given responsibilities usually reserved for more senior analysts. My salary increased accordingly, though it still barely covered comfortable living in New York City. Then came the opportunity that would transform my career. Our firm was considering investment opportunities in emerging blockchain technologies, still a relatively new and poorly understood field at the time. Because none of the senior analysts wanted to risk their reputations on such speculative investments, the research task fell to me. I spent weeks immersed in technical papers, interviewing developers, and analyzing potential applications beyond cryptocurrency. I identified 3 companies with solid technological foundations and practical business applications that were positioning themselves at the forefront of this revolution. These aren't just speculative plays, I explained in the investment committee meeting, surprising myself with my own confidence. They're developing infrastructure that could fundamentally change financial transactions, supply chain management, and data security. To my surprise, the committee approved small positions in 2 of my recommended companies. When those investments yielded 40% returns within 6 months, my reputation within the firm soared. By my 4th anniversary with the company, I had been promoted twice and was managing my own small team. My lifestyle changed accordingly. I moved from Queens to a sleek 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan's financial district. My discount store wardrobe was gradually replaced with designer pieces that helped me blend in with clients and senior partners. I joined a high-end gym and occasionally indulged in the fine dining experiences that New York was famous for. During one of my rare visits home, these changes became apparent to my parents in ways that created new tension. "Is that watch real?" Dad asked, noticing the Rolex on my wrist, a gift to myself after a particularly successful quarter. "Yes," I answered, suddenly self-conscious. It was a milestone reward for myself. "Must have cost thousands," he muttered, shaking his head, "for something that does exactly what my $30 Timex does." Mom noticed my designer handbag and made a similar comment. "I hope you're still putting money away for retirement, not just spending it all on accessories." Their concern wasn't entirely unfounded. They had grown up in a different era with different values. But what they couldn't understand was that in my world, these weren't just status symbols. They were professional necessities that helped establish credibility with the wealthy clients whose accounts I was beginning to manage. What hurt most was their inability to share in my excitement about my professional achievements. When I tried explaining a complex investment strategy that had yielded exceptional returns for our clients, their eyes would glaze over. When I mentioned the size of the portfolios I was now handling, in the tens of millions, they would change the subject as if the numbers made them uncomfortable. Our conversations increasingly centered on their world, neighborhood gossip, Dad's teaching challenges, and increasingly my brother James's career struggles. He had bounced between jobs since college, never finding his footing or purpose. While they expressed worry about him, there was also a warmth and understanding in their concern that seemed absent in their interactions with me. "At least he's trying to find his path," Mom would say defensively when I suggested James needed more structure and discipline. Not everyone knows exactly what they want right away. The implied criticism stung. The divide between us was growing not just in financial terms but in fundamental values and worldview. Yet despite these tensions, I still craved their approval and understanding in ways I wasn't fully ready to acknowledge. 3 years later, at 31, I had ascended to a position few achieve before 40, senior fund manager with my own client portfolio worth over $300 million. My reputation for identifying undervalued companies with strong growth potential had attracted high net worth clients who specifically requested my services. The financial press had named me one of 30 under financial wizards to watch, complete with a glossy photo spread in Financial Management Monthly. My life had transformed beyond recognition from my middle-class upbringing. I now lived in a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the Manhattan skyline. My closet held custom-tailored suits and dresses from designers whose names my mother would never recognize. Weekend getaways to Miami or the Hamptons had become routine, and I had a growing collection of contemporary art adorning my walls. With this success came a desire to share my good fortune with my family. On their 30th anniversary, I surprised my parents by paying off the remaining mortgage on their home, a gesture that cost me roughly $100,000 but barely dented my annual bonus. What Mom had asked, when I presented them with the documentation showing a zero balance. "Chérie, we can't accept this. It's too much. You sacrificed to put me through college," I reminded them. "Consider it repayment with interest." They accepted the gift reluctantly, their expressions a complex mixture of gratitude, discomfort, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Later, I learned from a neighbor that they had told people they had refinanced advantageously rather than admitting their daughter had paid off their home. This pattern repeated itself whenever I offered financial assistance. I sent them on a 2-week European vacation for Christmas, their first trip overseas, only to discover they had told friends they won it in a contest. When I offered to help them renovate their outdated kitchen, Dad insisted on getting 3 estimates and then chose the least expensive option, despite my assurances that budget wasn't a concern. Family gatherings became increasingly strained affairs. During Thanksgiving dinner at their house, the contrast between my designer outfit and their modest setting seemed to create an invisible barrier. Conversations felt forced with my parents, asking polite questions about my business without really wanting to understand the answers. "So things are good at work?" Dad would ask vaguely. "Very good," I would reply, consciously omitting details about the 7-figure deal I had just closed or the new investment strategy one was developing. "How are things at school?" He would then launch into detailed stories about his students and colleagues, a world I was no longer part of but could still relate to. I noticed how animated he became discussing his work compared to the strained interest he showed in mine. The most difficult dynamic involved my brother James. After graduating from community college with a general studies degree, he had drifted between retail jobs, bartending gigs, and half-hearted entrepreneurial ventures. None lasted more than 8 months, and each failure seemed to diminish his confidence further. During one Christmas visit, James pulled me aside as I was helping Mom with dishes. "Hey sis, can we talk privately for a minute?" His voice had that particular tone I had come to recognize, forced casualness masking desperation. In the guest bedroom, he outlined his latest business idea, a food truck specializing in gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches. His enthusiasm was genuine, but the business plan was full of holes. "I just need about $20,000 to get started," he concluded. "The truck equipment permits initial inventory. I can pay you back once it takes off." It wasn't the first time he had approached me for investment in his ventures. There had been the dog walking service, the custom t-shirt business, and the smartphone repair shop, all launched with my reluctant funding. All failed within months. "James, I love you, but I can't keep funding ideas without proper planning," I told him gently. "Have you researched the food truck regulations? Calculated daily overhead, identified your target locations and peak hours?" His face fell, then hardened. "Not everyone approaches everything like a spreadsheet, chérie. Some of us have vision and passion. Vision and passion need to be paired with preparation and realistic expectations," I countered. The conversation devolved quickly, ending with him storming out and slamming the door. At dinner that evening, the tension was palpable. Mom kept trying to smooth things over with forced cheerfulness while Dad shot disapproving glances my way. Later, I overheard them in the kitchen. "She could help him if she wanted to," Mom whispered. "She spends more on her shoes than what James was asking for." "That money has changed," her dad agreed. "She used to understand family loyalty." Their words stung more than they could know. What they interpreted as stinginess was actually concern. I had seen James's pattern of enthusiasm without follow-through too many times. Simply throwing money at his ideas wasn't helping him develop the discipline and resilience he needed. Despite my reservations, I found myself continuing to provide financial assistance to my brother behind the scenes. When he mentioned struggling with rent, I would secretly transfer funds to his account. When his car needed major repairs, I paid the mechanic directly. These quiet interventions allowed him to save face while preventing true hardship, but they also enabled his continued financial irresponsibility. The dynamic with my parents grew increasingly complicated as well. Though they refused most direct offers of help from me, I discovered through casual conversations that they were postponing needed medical procedures because of high deductibles, delaying home repairs due to costs, and cutting back on simple pleasures to build their emergency fund. Without telling them, I established a monthly stipend of $8,000 that went directly into their joint account disguised as a dividend payment from investments I had supposedly made in their names years earlier. I also created a separate fund of $8,000 monthly for unexpected expenses accessible through my financial manager. The combined $16,000 monthly allowance represented a fraction of my income but would have transformed their lifestyle if they had known about it and accepted it openly. The deception weighed on me, but I convinced myself it was necessary given their plight. Meanwhile, the emotional distance between us continued to grow, fueled by unspoken resentments and fundamentally different values around money, success, and family obligation. Last month marked 5 years since I had moved to New York. Despite my busy schedule, I made it a point to drive up to Boston for a Sunday family dinner. A tradition Mom had insisted we maintain despite our increasingly strained relationship. I arrived at the familiar two-story Colonial around 4 in the afternoon, parking my Audi between Dad's 10-year-old Camry and the neighbor's minivan. The house looked smaller each time I returned, though nothing had physically changed. The blue paint had faded slightly, and the front garden showed Mom's meticulous care with early spring flowers beginning to bloom. I gathered the gifts I had brought: an expensive bottle of Bordeaux, a cashmere sweater for Mom, and a rare first edition of Dad's favorite science fiction novel I had tracked down through a collector. Mom opened the door before I could ring the bell, her arms outstretched for a hug. "There's my girl. Right on time. As always." Her embrace felt genuine, and for a moment I let myself believe this visit might be different from the awkward interactions that had become our norm. The house smelt of roasting chicken and fresh bread, comfort foods from my childhood that Mom knew I loved. Dad emerged from his study, reading glasses perched on his head. "Sherry, good drive up." He hugged me with one arm, a gesture that felt both familiar and strangely formal. The initial conversation flowed more easily than I expected. We sat in the living room with cups of coffee catching up on surface-level news. I shared sanitized stories about New York life, carefully omitting references to the charity gala I had co-chaired or the vacation home in the Berkshires I was considering purchasing. They updated me on neighborhood changes and Dad's upcoming retirement plans. "The school's organizing a pretty big send-off," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. 35 years teaching science to ungrateful teenagers deserves some recognition, they figure. "That's wonderful, Dad. You've impacted so many lives." The sincerity in my voice seemed to momentarily bridge the gap between us. Mom mentioned her book club and volunteer work at the local food pantry, her eyes lighting up as she described helping families in need. I felt a pang of disconnection while I wrote checks to charities she gave her time and personal attention, something my lifestyle rarely accommodated. As Mom put final touches on dinner, I offered to help, falling into our old rhythm of meal preparation. For a few precious minutes as we worked side by side in the kitchen, the years and differences between us seemed to fade. "This wine is lovely," Sherry, Mom commented, after taking a small sip from the bottle I had brought. "Special occasion." "Being with family is always special," I replied, meaning it despite our complications. The peaceful atmosphere was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and my brother's voice calling out, "Sorry I'm late, traffic was insane." James entered the kitchen looking disheveled in wrinkled khakis and an untucked button-down shirt. At 28, he still had the boyish charm that had always helped him escape consequences, but new lines of stress around his eyes aged him beyond his years. "The prodigal daughter returns," he announced, giving me a theatrical hug. "How's life among the wolves of Wall Street?" There was an edge to his question that I chose to ignore. "Busy but good. How are things with you?" A shadow crossed his face before he forced a bright smile. "Actually, I'm between opportunities right now. The marketing firm downsized last month." This was news to me, though not surprising. James rarely kept jobs longer than 6 months. "You'll find something soon," Mom said, quickly patting his arm. "With your people skills, companies should be lining up to hire you." Dad nodded in agreement. Sometimes these setbacks lead to better things. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that this was his third job loss in 2 years. Instead, I asked, "Do you have some prospects lined up?" "Actually," James said, his expression brightening. "I've been developing a business concept, premium pet accessories with customizable features. The pet market is booming right now." The familiar enthusiasm in his voice triggered warning bells. This would inevitably lead to another request for startup capital that would disappear into a poorly executed plan. We moved to the dining room where Mom had set the table with the good china, a subtle acknowledgement of the special occasion my visit represented. For a while, conversation remained pleasantly neutral as we enjoyed the excellent meal. Mom had prepared all my childhood favorites: herb roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and homemade rolls. Remember when Sherry went through that phase where she would only eat chicken if it wasn't touching anything else on the plate? Dad chuckled momentarily, recapturing the easy family dynamic we once shared. I was 7. I protested with a laugh. And as I recalled, James was worse. He hid Brussels sprouts in his napkin for an entire year. Until the day Mom found a moldy stash in my desk drawer, James added, and we all genuinely laughed together for what felt like the first time in years. But the pleasant atmosphere shifted when James steered the conversation toward his new business idea. As he outlined his vision for custom-designed pet accessories, I noticed Mom and Dad exchanging glances. The initial investment is relatively small, James explained, addressing me directly. About $25,000 should cover everything to get started. The profit margins in this industry are incredible. I set down my fork carefully. Have you created a business plan? Researched manufacturers, identified distribution channels? His expression hardened. Not everyone succeeds by sucking the joy out of everything with endless analysis, chérie. Sometimes you have to follow your passion and take a leap of faith. James, I said gently. This isn't about passion versus analysis. It's about setting yourself up for success rather than failure. Mom jumped in her voice, carrying a defensive edge. Your brother is very creative, chérie. Not everyone measures success by a bank balance. That's not what I meant, I began, but Dad interrupted. James has good instincts about people. That counts for a lot in business. The implication was clear. They saw James as possessing human qualities I supposedly lacked. The familiar dynamic was reasserting itself, James as the misunderstood creative spirit, me as the cold calculating finance person who couldn't appreciate his gifts. Good instincts haven't paid his rent for the past 3 years, I said, immediately regretting the words. James' face flushed. Not all of us had the advantages you did. Advantages, I repeated incredulously. We grew up in the same house with the same opportunities. I worked throughout college and took on student loans. You had the right kind of brain for money, he shot back. Some of us have different gifts. Mom reached across the table to touch his hand supportively. Everyone finds their path at different times, James. The subtle positioning was unmistakable. They were once again aligning themselves with James against me. Years of frustration bubbled to the surface. Finding your path is one thing, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. Expecting others to repeatedly fund journeys to nowhere is something else entirely. Sherry, Mom gasped. What happened to family supporting each other? Dad demanded, his face reddening. You make more in a month than most people see in years, yet you lecture your brother about a relatively small amount. Supporting doesn't mean enabling, I countered. And this isn't about the money. It's about the pattern. James stood up abruptly. Not everyone can be perfect like you, chérie. Some of us are still trying to figure things out. After nearly a decade of adulthood, the words escaped before I could stop them. The tension in the room was unbearable. Mom's eyes filled with tears as she looked between us. Dad's jaw was set in that familiar way that signaled his disapproval. Perhaps, I said, trying to salvage the situation, we could look at your business plan together, James. I could help you develop a more structured approach. I don't need your condescension, he snapped. Just say you won't help. It's simpler than pretending to care. That's unfair, I replied, hurt by the accusation. I've helped you numerous times. Yes, while making me feel like a charity case, he pushed back from the table. I'd rather struggle forever than deal with your superiority complex. Enough, both of you, Dad's voice cut through the argument. He turned to me, disappointment evident in his expression. Chérie, your success is admirable, but it's changed you. Money isn't everything, and family should matter more than financial prudence. I never said money was everything. I defended myself, and family does matter. That's why I want to see James succeed, not just temporarily bail him out repeatedly. Mom wiped her eyes with her napkin. We didn't raise you to be so judgmental. The accusation stung deeply. Was that how they saw me? The cruel, successful daughter withholding help from her struggling brother. I'm trying to be helpful in ways that actually matter long term. I explained, frustration mounting. Sometimes real help isn't just writing a check. Oh, that's rich coming from you, James interjected. Your solution to everything is throwing money around. Your fancy car, your designer clothes, your ridiculous apartment. It's all about showing off how much better you are than us. Something in me snapped. Years of suppressed hurt and misunderstanding came flooding out. That's not true. I've tried to share my success with all of you, but you make it impossible. You reject my gifts or hide them from your friends. You criticize my career while benefiting from it behind the scenes. You defend James's irresponsibility while condemning my attempts to help him build something sustainable. We're not interested in your charity, Dad shouted, shocking everyone with his volume. We didn't raise you to look down on your family from your financial pedestal. I don't look down on you, I protested, my voice breaking slightly. I'm proud of you, of our family. I just want to share what I've achieved. Mom's next words landed like a physical blow. Maybe we don't want to be part of that world. Maybe we were happier before money became your god. The silence that followed was deafening. We stared at each other across the beautifully set table, the remnants of our family dinner growing cold between us. Finally, Dad delivered the line that would change everything. We're not your bank anymore, chérie, and you're not ours. This family was doing fine before your Wall Street success, and we'll manage without it. The dining room fell silent after Dad's outburst. His words hung in the air between us, almost visible in their intensity. Mom stared down at her plate, refusing to meet my eyes. James looked simultaneously shocked and vindicated by our father's uncharacteristic explosion. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe properly, as though Dad's words had physically knocked the wind out of me. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the familiar surroundings of my childhood home suddenly alien and hostile. 20 years of striving, achieving, and sharing had culminated in this moment of profound misunderstanding. Not my bank. I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Is that what you think I see you as? Dad's expression remained defiant, though something flickered in his eyes, perhaps a recognition that he had crossed a line. Before he could respond, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Normally I would have ignored it during a family dinner, but in that moment I was grateful for any escape from the emotional intensity. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from my financial manager, Taylor. Monthly allowance transfers ready for processing. Approve their $16,000 monthly allowance. Also, James requested additional $5,000 for business venture. Awaiting your confirmation. The timing was so perfect it almost seemed orchestrated by fate. I looked up from my phone to find 3 pairs of eyes watching me warily. Work emergency? Mom asked, a touch of sarcasm in her voice that would have been unthinkable in the past. No, I replied slowly, feeling a strange calm descend over me. Actually, it's a question from my financial manager about your monthly allowance. What? Dad's brow furrowed in confusion. I took a deep breath, realizing that the moment of truth had arrived, whether I was ready for it or not. Taylor wants to know if I should approve the $16,000 monthly deposits into your accounts. I kept my voice level, watching their expressions carefully. That's $8,000 for your joint account disguised as investment dividends, and another $8,000 for the emergency fund I established for unexpected expenses. The confusion on their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. Mom's mouth opened and closed without producing words. Dad's expression shifted from anger to bewilderment. What are you talking about? He finally managed. I'm talking about the money I've been providing to this family for the past 3 years. I answered, still maintaining that unnatural calm. The mysterious investment dividends that appear in your account every month. That's me. The insurance reimbursements that covered Dad's knee surgery last year. Also me. The fortunate timing of tax refunds that somehow always arrive when major house repairs are needed. All me. James stood up so quickly, his chair nearly toppled backward. That's not possible. They would have known. I looked directly at him. And the anonymous business investor who provided startup capital for your last 3 ventures, the one who never asked for repayment when those businesses failed. That was me too, James. The color drained from his face as the implications sank in. I don't understand, Mom stammered. We never accepted that kind of money from you. We would have remembered. You didn't accept it directly, because I knew your pride wouldn't allow it, I explained. So I found workarounds. Dad, remember when you were worried about retirement and suddenly discovered that your pension had better terms than you realized? That was because I supplemented it through a private arrangement with your pension fund manager. Dad sank back into his chair, the anger completely gone from his face, replaced by shock and something that looked uncomfortably like shame. I picked up my phone again and typed a quick response to Taylor tonight, then I set the phone on the table screen up where they all could see it. You've been secretly supporting us. All this time Mom's voice was barely audible. Yes, I said simply, because you wouldn't let me help openly. Every time I offered you made me feel like I was showing off or trying to buy your affection. So I found another way. But $16,000 a month? Dad shook his head in disbelief. That's more than I made in a quarter as a teacher. It's what I could afford to share comfortably, I replied. What I wanted to share with my family. James collapsed back into his chair. So all those investors who believed in my ideas, there was only one investor, James. Me. I created different company names and worked through my financial team to make it seem like multiple people saw potential in your ventures. Why would you do that? He asked, his voice hollow. Because you're my brother and I love you. Because I wanted you to have the chance to succeed without feeling like you were taking charity from your sister. The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of years of misunderstandings and unspoken emotions. Mom was the first to break at tears, streaming down her face. Chérie, we never knew, we thought. You thought I was showing off when I offered to help, I finished for her. You thought money had changed me for the worse, that I'd forgotten where I came from. But the truth is, everything I've done with my success was about remembering exactly where I came from and who helped me get there. Dad cleared his throat, looking older and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. The comments we made. What we just said to you. He couldn't finish the sentence. Were based on a fundamental misunderstanding, I completed gently. You saw me as flaunting wealth and forgetting family values. I saw myself as sharing success with the people I love most in the world. James stared at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. All those lectures about responsibility, about business plans. You weren't being condescending. No, I wasn't, I confirmed. I genuinely wanted to see you succeed on your own terms. The money was never the issue, James. I would have gladly funded 20 more failed ventures if I thought they were helping you grow and learn. We've been horrible to you, Mom whispered, fresh tears falling, while all this time you were taking care of us? Not horrible, I corrected her. Just proud. Too proud to accept help directly from your daughter. Too uncomfortable with my success to see it as an extension of everything you taught me. Dad reached across the table tentatively, his hand seeking mine. Can you forgive us, chérie? Can we start over somehow? I placed my hand in his, feeling the familiar calluses from years of hard work. There's nothing to forgive. We all did what we thought was right based on what we understood at the time. James finally looked up, his expression, a complex mixture of shame, gratitude, and something that might have been the beginning of genuine self-awareness. I've been taking advantage of you, of everyone, for years. You've been searching, I suggested more kindly. Perhaps without the right tools or mindset, but searching nonetheless. What happens now? Mom asked quietly, with the allowance? I considered this for a moment. That's up to all of us to decide together. But I think we start by being honest. About money, about our feelings, about what family really means to each of us. The atmosphere in the dining room had transformed completely. The tension had dissolved, replaced by a fragile but genuine openness that felt both new and somehow familiar. Like returning to a home you had forgotten you missed. Dad squeezed my hand gently. You really are extraordinary, chérie. Not because of your success or your money, because of who you are despite all that. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen by my father. Not as the financial whiz kid or the daughter who had strayed from their path, but as the person I had become with all my strengths and flaws intact. I learned from the best, I told him, meaning it completely. The weeks following that transformative dinner were both challenging and healing. After leaving my parents' home that evening, I checked into a hotel in Boston rather than driving back to New York immediately. I needed time to process everything that had happened and what it meant for our family going forward. The next morning, I called Dr. Elena Winters, a therapist I had been seeing occasionally in New York, to help navigate the complexities of my high-pressure career. Our scheduled video session became an unplanned discussion about family dynamics and healthy boundaries. What you did came from a place of love. Dr. Winters acknowledged when I explained the situation. But secret support, however well-intentioned, created an unhealthy dynamic. True boundaries require transparency and mutual respect. I thought I was respecting their pride. I countered. Were you, she asked gently, or were you controlling the situation in a way that felt comfortable to you but denied them agency in the relationship? Her question stung with its accuracy. By providing financial support secretly, I had made unilateral decisions about our family relationships. Despite my good intentions, I had inadvertently created a power imbalance. Moving forward, Dr. Winters suggested consider what healthy support looks like. Financial assistance freely given and freely received without manipulation or hidden agendas on either side. I spent the next few days reflecting on her words while extending my stay in Boston. On the third day, I called my parents and asked if we could meet for coffee at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between their home and my hotel. They arrived together looking nervous but determined. Mom had clearly taken extra care with her appearance, and Dad wore the sweater I had given him for his birthday. These small gestures of effort touched me deeply. I'd been thinking about our relationship I began once we were seated with our drinks, and I realized now that my approach to helping was flawed. I made decisions for you rather than with you. Mom nodded slowly, and we were too stubborn to accept what was offered openly, too caught up in our own pride. I think Dad added thoughtfully we were afraid of changing roles. Parents are supposed to provide for children, not the other way around. It felt like failing somehow. It's not failure, I assured him. It's evolution. Families support each other in different ways at different times. Your emotional support and wisdom are just as valuable as any financial help I can offer. We talked for nearly 3 hours that day, more honestly than we had in years. I explained exactly how much I had been contributing and how the arrangements worked. They shared their mixed feelings of gratitude and discomfort. Together we began to imagine a new relationship based on openness rather than assumption. I don't want to continue the secret allowance, I told them, but I would like to establish a family trust that we manage together, a transparent way to share resources that honors everyone's contribution and needs. The idea appealed to them, especially the aspect of shared control and transparency. Dad suggested a monthly family meeting to discuss finances openly, and Mom proposed including charitable giving as part of the trust's purpose. James proved to be the most difficult part of the healing process. When I called to suggest meeting one-on-one, he initially refused, too embarrassed by the revelations about his business ventures. I can't face you right now, he admitted, over the phone. Knowing that you were behind everything, watching me fail repeatedly with your money. It's humiliating. That's not how I see it, I told him. Each attempt taught you something, James. The failure isn't in trying and not succeeding, it's in never learning from the experience. Eventually, he agreed to meet at a local diner, SB Po, the same one where we had celebrated his high school graduation years earlier. The James who arrived was subtly different from the brother I had known. His shoulders slightly hunched, his usually confident demeanor muted. I've been thinking about what you said, he began before even ordering coffee. About learning from failure. I realized I've been starting businesses without actually building the skills needed to run them. His self-awareness surprised and pleased me. That's an important insight. So, I've enrolled in a business certificate program at the community college, he continued. Basic accounting, marketing fundamentals, business planning. The boring stuff I always thought I could skip. That's fantastic, James, I said, genuinely impressed. I don't want your money anymore, he added firmly. At least not as handouts or investments. If you want to help, maybe you could advise me sometimes. Look over my plans as a sister, not a secret investor. The request moved me deeply. I would be honored to do that. Over the following months, our family began the delicate work of rebuilding relationships on more honest foundations. The family trust was established with clear guidelines and transparent administration. My parents gradually became more comfortable discussing money openly, though old habits occasionally resurfaced. James threw himself into his courses with unexpected diligence, calling occasionally with specific questions about business concepts he was learning. These conversations focused on education rather than requests for funding brought us closer in ways that money never had. 6 months after the fateful dinner, we gathered again at my parents' home. The atmosphere could not have been more different from our previous encounter. Mom had prepared the same meal, herb-roasted chicken and all the trimmings, but the conversation around the table flowed naturally without the undercurrents of resentment and misunderstanding. James proudly shared his business school grades and a modest but thorough business plan he was developing for his final project. Dad talked openly about their retirement finances and how the family trust had allowed them to volunteer more and worry less. Mom described the local education initiative they had decided to support with part of the trust's charitable allocation. As we finished dessert, Mom's famous apple pie, Dad raised his glass in an impromptu toast to honesty and new beginnings. We all clinked glasses, the simple Gesture symbolizing the transformed dynamic between us. Later, as I helped Mom with dishes, she asked quietly, "Are you happy, chérie?" Not just successful but truly happy. The question would have seemed intrusive or judgmental months ago. Now it felt like genuine maternal concern. I told her truthfully. My work challenges me, and now that things are better with all of you, I feel complete in a way I haven't for years. She nodded, sat his feet. That's all we ever wanted for you, you know. Not a specific career or lifestyle, just happiness and fulfillment. I know that now, I replied, hugging her spontaneously, dishwasher still half-loaded between us. That evening as I drove back to my hotel before returning to New York the next day, I reflected on the journey our family had taken. The painful confrontation had ultimately been the catalyst for authentic connection. Money had not been the real problem. It was the meaning we attached to it and the ways we had used it to express deeper feelings we couldn't articulate. I had learned that true generosity involves not just giving but also allowing others the dignity of choice and participation. My parents had learned that accepting help doesn't diminish their role or worth in the family. James was discovering that genuine support goes beyond financial assistance to include mentorship and accountability. Most importantly, we had all learned that family relationships require continuous reinvention as circumstances change. The parent-child dynamic that serves us in childhood needs to evolve into something more balanced in adulthood. The transitions may be awkward and painful, but the new equilibrium can be richer and more fulfilling than what came before. Money, I realized, is never just about the dollars and cents. It's a tangible representation of our values, fears, hopes, and identity. When we can discuss it openly, we create space for honesty about everything else that matters. As I merged onto the highway toward New York, I felt lighter than I had in years. The complex web of secret financial arrangements had been replaced by something far more valuable: authentic connection based on truth and mutual respect. What about your family? Have financial differences created misunderstandings in your relationships? How did you overcome them? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might benefit from it. Remember, sometimes the most valuable currency in any relationship isn't money at all, it's honesty. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and may your own family find its way to authentic connection, whatever form that takes.